Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my good friend and repeat guest, Scott Boulanger, a.k.a. Jax Falcone, a.k.a. Dino Game Theory over on Twitter. I just told everybody all your different names, Scott, but you could tell everybody where they can find your work and kind of tell them what you've been working on lately.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. Love being on the show. Big fan of yours. So, my show, The Undrafted, is the podcast I've been doing for some time. I think you're going to be a guest here pretty soon.
Yep.
And we've got a new show. Myself, Travis, and Joe Kuvatakis. We've got the Dynasty Underground. Only about 5 or 6 episodes in. We're having a lot of fun with it. A little bit more conversation, the three of us all the time. So kind of fun. And then keep an eye out for the wide receiver model coming out soon. So pretty stoked for all that.
So this is the time of year for that, right? Like here's the model, the film review, and the anatomy of a top 12 series. This is about that time that you do it every year. And we were going to get into what this means, but essentially, and remind me, it's top 12 for quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, top 6 for tight end. Is that right?
I've changed it up. I want to look at the elite set, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I make arbitrary cuts. It's not a perfect science, so I do whatever I think is best. But so roughly there, yeah.
We were just
I cut it off at like David Njoku or something like that. I think he was tight end 9 or 10 or something, and maybe that felt a little too much. So you kind of adjust it as you go.
I think he validated your decision to include him last season. And so, we'll get into that, kind of look at what do the elite players at each position look like and what did they look like coming into the NFL. Also, I am updating my dynasty rankings this week on the site. There will be fresh quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end rankings. I'm hoping to also have fresh trade charts. Good time to mention I'm heading out of town for a funeral, so there will not be a Friday show this week. So I'm hopeful by Thursday morning we can get all those new rankings up. As we go through and you give me the names of the guys who are in those elite tiers, I'm going to be kind of looking at my dynasty rankings, and I may offer a couple places where maybe just a question about why doesn't this guy count? Do you use, when you're looking at the top, are you using your own rankings? Are you using ADP or trade charts? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so I use Keep Trade Cut, our consensus rankings at the Undroppables, mine, and then just I've got final editing,
right.
But I try to stick to something that isn't my opinion, because I might value this player more than that player based off of reasons that have to do with the anatomy or something. So I try to use Keep Trade Cut to keep a value centric list rather than my personal opinion.
Excellent stuff. Of course, as always, we start with 3 questions for our guest. And a lot of times what I like to do is I go to their Twitter page, or if it's a Blue Sky person, I go to their Blue Sky page, wherever they kind of are I get their stream of consciousness. And I was like, what stands out to me? And on your page, what stood out to me was the name Jackson Dart. And we are getting into rookie prep time. Some people are in the middle of it. Some people are at the beginning of it. Give me your elevator pitch for Jackson Dart.
Yeah, well, first of all, his name is Dart. I mean, come on, we got to, so if we're only going up one floor, I'm just going to say that, and then you'll be like, yeah, I guess that tracks. But in a bad quarterback class, analytically, he's the best quarterback in the class. He plays the quarterback position on time. So, and he's very accurate. So just those 2 things, I think an NFL team is going to want a player who plays on time. We look at Caleb playing off script way too much. You look at a guy like Bo Nix playing on time. Which one was more successful in year one? The player playing on time was more successful. He also improved each year of his college career. I think that goes a lot into what we look at the quarterback position. Just look at, whether it be Joe Burrow or Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels. Look at those, improvements in their college career. So, if I'm betting on one of these players to hit, they'll need to improve, right? Any of them, whether it be Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or any of them. So a bet on Dart is a bet that he'll be able to adapt.
Now, a lot has changed in the NFL since the last time you and I talked on this show. One thing I like about talking to you is a lot of times I get caught up in talking about players. And a lot of times you seem to be focusing on theory and strategy. Has anything changed in your dynasty strategy over the last year, which was kind of a strange year for dynasty fantasy managers?
Yeah, good point. And that's where my answer is going, I think. I think the running back fragility is where you're sort of going. And that's part of one of the things that I think is kind of important. I think I'll lean into that, right? I think I'm going to lean into the running back fragility and just sort of bet on, especially with this class coming in, that a lot of these running backs will not be, sort of standing at the end of 2025. So I think I'll lean further into that, because I think the change that might be perceived is that, running backs are fine all the time. Whereas I think that was more of an outlier season. So that's probably a good one.
I love that. It takes me back to when I first started at CBS. It was actually the opposite of Dynasty as a DFS guy. And not just that, but a DFS baseball guy. And your process was just being constantly challenged because it was just nothing unusual at all for the process to be completely right and fail 3 days in a row. And then you got to choose, how much did I really believe in that thing that I was saying? And I hear a lot of people talking about running backs, and obviously everything changed last year. And I think you're right. Let's lean into the thing that we knew to be true.
Yep.
What's the worst thing that happens? We look like idiots again. That's happened before. Okay, who is? And I'm looking now at the rundown that I sent you, and I butchered this question so bad. So I don't know what name you have, but I'm going to give you a chance to spin it in the right way. I wonder, when we're looking at the free agents heading into the month of March, when a lot of things are going to change, what I was looking for, but did a poor job of wording to you, is who's the guy whose value is the most volatile right now, who could really move up a lot or down a lot in free agency?
Well, I think I might have nailed that anyway, because I have like 4 names based off of what I wasn't sure what your question was. I think it's Justin Fields. Justin Fields could end up with another backup role, or, even worse, sort of waiting for a backup role. Even that's possible. He also could get signed with purpose. It doesn't sound like there's not much of a groundswell for that, which is kind of why I think that the value could change quite a bit. Because I think right now people are sort of assuming, there's a lot of Kirk Cousins, Matt Stafford, Aaron Rodgers talk, but there isn't anything about Justin Fields. So I think his value is super suppressed right now. You could probably buy him on the cheap in Dynasty. And if somehow he lands a starting gig, he's a top 10, dynasty or fantasy quarterback, excuse me. Just based off rushing alone. So at that particular point, obviously it becomes very valuable, even if you just want to trade and flip.
One of the names we talked about on FFT just an hour ago, and I don't know how I lined up 3 podcasts back to back for myself today, but good job, Heath, with the scheduling, was Anthony Richardson.
Well, at least my pod is real short.
Anthony Richardson, what's the difference if Justin Fields signs a 1-year contract to be a starter? What's the difference between Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson in Dynasty?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I agree with that. Nothing. I mean, maybe you can say Anthony Richardson is drafted or playing with the team that drafted him, and is a little bit more emotional and monetary commitment to him. But that's about it.
No, I think he's got 1 year left in Indianapolis, and he might have half a year left, depending on who they sign to be his backup. So it is, there's top 5 upside in any given season for those guys.
Yes.
And they might also be worth 0 in your dynasty league as soon as November.
Yep.
So 100%. Let's take a short break and we'll get into the anatomy of series.
Cool.
Yeah, we always find our way back home.
We are back, and Scott thought the break was going to be a little longer than it was. Which is okay. It was a short break.
You're like, and he's gone. No, I'm here.
That's fantastic. I love it. So let's first just kind of tell people what the anatomy of series is and how they should use it.
First and foremost, it's fun. Yeah. The when I did the first one, whatever it was 5 years ago, the word I used was the basic anatomy of, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm not trying, like, the whole idea when I first did it was like there was so much at that time. There was so much like the R squared of targets per route run is people were just nerding out so heavily on data that it felt like data was people hated it, and I was like, why do we hate it? It is important, but let's make it fun. Let's make it something that's approachable for like 90% of the viewership. And when I first posted it, people loved it, and I said, yeah, that's what I was trying to do, is fun. So first and foremost, it's fun, but the basic gist of it is taking the top, whatever, as you point out, 12 or so players at each position, and sort of, all right, putting them, what if they were prospects right now? What did they look like when they were prospects coming out of college? Where were they drafted? How much did they weigh? What did they run? What was it about them, as a prospect, and sort of looking at them as a whole, and sort of, then I say, contrasting the incoming class to those, to that sort of baseline, and seeing where these guys stack up. It's really easy to fall in love with some of these prospects, and then you put them against some of the elites, and you're like, this guy's not elite,
So and this is going to be interesting as we move through the positions. The first two we're going to go through is quarterback and running back, and these are going to be wildly different discussions, I would assume, in terms of how this class matches up with the anatomy of. Let's start at the quarterback position and just tell me, like, who is your data set here? Who are we looking at?
So the top 12 are, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, Drake May, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Jordan Love. That's the top 12 dynasty quarterbacks for most services right now.
I think when I look at my rankings, you said Jordan Love, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess the two guys that I wonder if they got left out from a fantasy perspective are Brock Purdy and Kyler Murray.
Yep.
And the two guys or really just one guy who I am really uncertain about right now is CJ Stroud.
Okay.
I'm not sure that maybe not been who you thought I was going to say.
I think you might have said Caleb,
No, I mostly just am buying I saw enough upside out of him, and he got Ben Johnson. Yeah. And he's got DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. And I'm just like, sometimes great quarterbacks are bad as rookies. That's kind of what I'm expecting with Caleb.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the guy who was good as a rookie, but not really great for fantasy purposes in Stroud, and then took a massive step back.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that doesn't seem to fit the perception at this time, but when you're looking at these 12 quarterbacks, we don't need to include, like, Kyler obviously stretches some of these limitations when it comes to size and when it comes to playing style. I think Purdy stretches some when it comes to draft capital.
Bingo.
Like, if you include those guys, then it probably makes the range maybe too big to be useful.
And if you think about that, those two things that stretch are what keep them from having high value sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. So, sometimes people are like, he's a little too small, can't reach the outside. Like, there's a narrative that falls for both of those traits that sort of hold them back.
No, that's a great answer. And so when you look at these guys, what's the takeaway for you at the quarterback position, or the top two or three?
Well, it's always draft capital, unfortunately. It's like, you look at this, especially, they're all first round picks now, except for Jalen Hurts. So, you're kind of looking in the first round. And if you add Kyler and Purdy, Purdy's another crazy outlier, and Kyler was the first overall pick. So generally speaking, you're looking in the first round. Generally speaking, you're looking in the first half of the first round, as I think only 1, 2, 3 were outside the top 12, basically. So, you're talking Jordan Love, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts outside. And I would argue that Jordan Love, for me, I'm happy to put any of those other guys ahead of him. I think Jordan Love is a little bit of a fragile asset for various reasons, and some of them show up on the anatomy, if you want to continue there.
Let's do that.
Yeah, so ultimately, like, you look at Jordan Love, and he falls short on it. Like, one of the categories is career interception percentage. He's sort of above the mark. His college interception percentage. Interception rate. That sounds better. 2.6%. It's pretty high. Certainly higher than Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, and Jackson Dart. So not that good. And then his touchdown to interception rate for his career was the lowest in that group. And again, lower than all the other prospects coming in. And what does he do? He's a little erratic, right? Jordan Love is prolific, but erratic. And so that sort of, uncertainty at the quarterback position is a little scary for GMs and coaches.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned that Love kind of falls behind these guys we have in the rookie class in terms of interception percentage or interception rate. I am assuming, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming that Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart fall short of a lot of these measures.
They're not great,
Okay.
but they're not bad either. First of all, the three things that the one thing that all three of those guys have is college attempts. I think we're seeing, the sort of 1-year wonders, the Trubiskys, the A-Rich, the Trey Lance. There's a lot of busts that have been not very, didn't have a lot of college attempts. All these guys are above like 1,300, just a huge number. Completion percentage, they're all pretty good. Yards per attempt, they're all pretty good. Interception percentage, they're fine. Jackson Dart, the worst. But they don't have, they're not as prolific. When you look at I look at even just you want to see one prolific season generally in terms of total touchdowns. They fall short there, so they weren't that prolific. You look at Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. They also don't have that rushing upside.
Right.
Well, they might have the rushing upside, but they didn't show it. Whereas Jackson Dart actually did. He ranks fourth on that list of players I just gave you, behind Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Hurts, and slightly behind Drake May. So he's right there with Drake May as a rusher, so yeah, some of these metrics they actually look pretty good at. But that's the hard thing about quarterback too, because it's not to say really that they are good or bad. It's just to really put it on a scale. I think some of the other positions are a little easier to identify, but I look at yards per attempt and completion percentage and turnover ratio, those things, because that just sort of speaks to your general, efficiency and ability to process information at the next level.
Excellent. Now we had one of our favorite listeners and chatters says, "I'm just here for the Joe Milton segment." And and I've got bad news for you, Mr. Popyansky, because if you're looking for a guy who had a lot of pass attempts in college, Joe Milton was 649 attempts. If you're looking for good draft capital, he was a 6th round pick. He did have a good touchdown to interception ratio. The yards per attempt was okay, but no season with more than 20 passing touchdowns. Joe Milton is not someone, he's going to have to be an outlier if he's going to end up mattering for fantasy football, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's the thing is a bet for Joe Milton is not a good bet, but at cost, maybe, because let's face it, he could certainly find his way onto the field. And some of these guys, you'd bet on them, even Will Levis, we didn't love Will Levis, right. But, he gets drafted, he starts, you can, flip him at that point.
Right. And Joe Milton, as you said, part of the reason we're doing this is for fun. And there are a few things more fun than getting excited about what Joe Milton could be, even if the vast majority of the numbers and historical data suggest that it might be a bad bet.
And I will say that the anatomy for the quarterback is very, very limited in terms of trying to be predictive. It really is. It's the worst one. It's the hardest one. Think about it. I mean, we get quarterback wrong so often. So, I mean, I've got no strident takes on how I'm better at evaluating quarterbacks than someone else. Absolutely not.
Right. So if the quarterback class is a little bit lacking in 2025, anybody who's heard anything about the 2025 class has heard how robust this running back class is. I'm really interested to hear how many of these guys actually look good according to the anatomy of a top 12 running back. But my first question would be what, because I feel like there's 6 that I'm sure of, and then I have no idea who your data set was here.
Yeah. Well, Bijan, Gibbs, Barkley, Breece Hall, Achane is and then JT. But then it's it's really hard. And I, hate to actually, add these other guys because I feel like there's a lot of, difference of opinions from there. But Kyron Williams, Ken Walker, probably not everybody loves being in there. Bucky Irving, hard to put him in there, but he is a top 12 Dynasty running back right now at value. Christian McCaffrey, Lifetime Achievement Award. He's still there, though, if he plays. James Cook and Josh Jacobs.
So that you may have named, I think there's one name you must have said, oh, I don't have McCaffrey in my top 12.
Right.
And the one name you didn't name that is in my top 12 is Chase Brown.
Right. There you go. Fine. Sure.
So,
but there's the point.
Yeah,
right?
that's 11 of my top 12. So I think
Yeah.
you did a fantastic job and you really hit the nail on the head, Scott, with the guys that you chose.
Yeah.
Now, just from hearing those names, I know there's like a wide variety of draft capital. Does that matter less at the running back position?
Way less, right? I mean, it is kind of interesting that data set, I think all but one were early declares. And I don't know that that's going to be as important going forward, just because of the situation in college with the, them getting paid and all that. You see Travion, you see Devin Neal, you're sort of seeing guys stay a little bit longer now. So
my thought just on that point was that we've seen it become less important here recently, but I think it maybe shifts back.
Maybe.
Because if somebody's willing to leave and they're good enough to get drafted and they're willing to forego that money, that tells me that they're planning on making a lot of money in the NFL. They might be truly elite.
Great call. Great call. Yeah, that's the thing is like just looking at the data. The one thing that's interesting about the way that I've done this is when I do this, people go, well, why don't you look at like the past 5 years of performance rather than the instant value of a player right now? It's like, well, the whole point of it is to be trying to look forward a little bit rather than look back. Everybody does, last 5 years, this is trying to be a little bit forward looking. The one thing that's happened at the running back position that has changed our perception. I say our, I'm thinking of Joe Kuvatakis, my partner at the Undroppables, but, is that we used to say size and speed, period, end of story, like stop, end the conversation. Now you look at, there's a lot of guys under 200 pounds, which was never the case for the previous iterations of this. Only last year and this year do we see the sub 200 backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, Bucky Irving, James Cook, even Christian McCaffrey. So Christian McCaffrey used to be the outlier, him and maybe Aaron Jones, but those two players were over 200 pounds. Now you've got a slew of guys coming in and performing under 200 pounds. There's a lot of reasons for that we can break down, but I think it does signify that you don't have to be a sizist anymore.
So what if size doesn't matter quite as much and draft capital doesn't matter quite as much at this position? Like we know the early declares, at least in this group, most of them are. What else do these backs share in terms of commonality?
So explosiveness and 3-down capabilities, right? So you generally see a lot of, reception signal, so ultimately career receptions, best year receptions, even yards per route run, things like that tend to sort of get in there. I like looking at, especially, when leveled for playing, strength of schedule. Like in other words, if a guy comes from a super small school, you can maybe throw this out, but yards per carry and yards per reception, you see a guy with over 10 yards per catch at his college career, probably pretty explosive. Either he's explosive or he has downfield, passing ability, right? So one or the other, and either of those two things I can sort of get with at the next level. So, but yeah, usually also early production. Almost all these guys smashed as a freshman or a sophomore in college. So a lot of those things. So that explosion, the pass catching chops, and early production.
Is there anybody from the 2025 class? Now, I mean, I guess I could ask how many backs fit, but there's like 73 of them, I assume, based on how deep this class is. So is there anybody from this 2025 class that you really thought after going through this, this guy I like a little bit more, or this guy I like a little bit less? Or if you just want to tell me like how many potential top 12 backs you think we have in this class, I'll take that too.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think Devin Neal was pretty good in the model. I think DJ Giddens is pretty good. Like there's some guys that, you start to, but I also want to see some 40 times and some official weights. I like to put that in there. So I haven't broken it down entirely. Obviously Travion, I know you and I are going to talk about him on my show, and I know you love him. I mean, there's a guy, right? He's super explosive with the pass catching upside, super productive early. Like he really hits every one. So Travion's my RB2 as well. Not to
I'm kind of feeling like it's Genty is the most clear one,
obviously,
that I can remember. And Travion is a very clear in his own two. And then there's a tier of backs. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Devin Neal is a third best back in this class.
Possible. Yeah.
It might be Judkins. It might be Caleb John. I mean, there's a lot of guys who could be number 3, but I feel pretty good about 1 and 2. When I look, though, like, we're talking right now about the top 12 dynasty running backs, and we're including Christian McCaffrey, and like York hesitantly including Ken Walker, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving. I would hesitantly include Chase Brown.
Right.
I know Ashton Genty almost certainly, unless some crazy thing happens in the next 2 months, is going to be a top 4 dynasty running back for me before he plays a game in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm pretty sure Travion Henderson is going to be a top 9 or 10 running back for me before he plays it down in the NFL. And there may be another guy who ends up top 12 as well by midseason.
Yeah, I do agree. Travion, all these running backs, maybe except for Genty, are a little bit landing spot dependent. The one thing with the running back position, of course, that's so much different than the wide receiver position is, you need to be handed the ball. Wide receiver sort of earns his targets by being open. I mean, you have to be schemed a little bit too. I mean, there's first read, second read, etc. I get that, but for the most part, the quarterback throws it to the guy who's open, and the guy who's good. So if you have 3 wide receivers out there, one of them is going to get it. But the running backs have to be put in the game and play. So I mean, if one of these guys just landing spot falls behind a established veteran, it's like maybe we have to wait a year, maybe the value falls. But to your point, I do agree that I love Travion a lot. So, and
you mentioned landing spot matters, and I really hadn't thought about that, but looking at this list, most of these guys are on good teams.
Yeah.
Like, you can't call the Falcons good, but they haven't been an absolute disaster. Breece Hall is probably the exception. He has, and we've seen that, like, he's ranked higher than what his production would dictate.
Yeah.
And so
touchdown upside, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I still have so much regret. And I don't even know why I still bring it up, because it just makes me look like an idiot. But I fell for the Clyde Edwards-Helaire trap because the Chiefs took him, because he got round 1 draft capital. And I thought, I'm pretty sure there's me on tape somewhere before the draft saying that Jonathan Taylor was a generational talent at running back. And then I fell for the Clyde Edwards-Helaire trap. But
the Clyde Edwards-Helaire trap was specifically hard to resist because it was the Chiefs and because there were no running backs taken in the first round until the very end of it. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes, and we had the whole night to talk about, that whole evening and next day to talk about Clyde. There was a news cycle surrounding Clyde Edwards-Helaire to the Chiefs, which steamed him so much. Like, if the whole first and second round would go all at once, it would have been different. I'm telling you for sure, because it would have been like a couple of picks later, JT went. It's no big deal. You know what I mean? It's the same difference. Like, if it wasn't round 1, round 2. It was just like pick 32 and pick, what was it, 38 or something? It's like, who cares? But yeah, it was the overnight steam.
I think that's a really good point. And the other thing that I fall for, and this has worked really well in the past too. It's not always fool's gold, but I 100% fall for the young quarterback told us to draft this player.
Yeah.
And we got that too. Like, they were saying Mahomes was the one who wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Yes. Bad job, Mahomes. Turns out you're not a general manager. Let's just play quarterback. Let's take our second break, and then we'll get to the wide receiver and tight end positions.
Find our way back home.
We are back. Scott is here, and we are going to talk about the wide receiver position. I am really interested to kind of hear, like, did you go all the way to 12, and how did you cut it off at 12? Because there's an elite tier at this position, but there's also quite a bit of, for me, question marks in the back half of that top 12.
So I think I went to 16.
16. I like it. So let's hear who those 16, the anatomy of the top 16 dynasty wide receivers, true difference makers. Who are they?
Yeah. And I think you would look at it like maybe there's a top 6, but there isn't a top 12, right? You know what I mean? You could say, oh, there's a top 6 or 7. So 16 was the right number. So Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra, Puka, Nico Collins, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, Drake London, my boy, Ladd McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr., T. Higgins, JSN, Rashee Rice, and Brian Thomas Jr. In no particular order. Brian Thomas Jr. is ranked higher than those guys, just for the record.
So yeah, that's did you say Drake London?
I did.
You did say Drake London.
Yep.
You did say Brian Thomas.
Yep.
You did not say Jordan Addison.
I did not.
And you did not say Xavier Worthy.
I did not.
And so Worthy, I have Worthy and Rice back to back. I don't know what to make of those two going into next year.
That's fair now.
And I think like the reason that my argument for putting Rice in and not Worthy was that we got about 4 more games of Rice producing at this level than we have of Worthy so far. Yeah. And when they were both on the field together, Rice was clearly a lot better, but I think that's unfair to Worthy because it was his first 3 or 4 games in the NFL. But those two guys, I have a hard time separating right now, but I think that's a good list. The one thing I could say for sure is nobody's going to argue with the inclusion of any of those guys. They might argue with the exclusion of someone else.
Yeah.
What did you find?
Like real quick, like Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, Xavier Worthy, Rome Odunze, Zay Flowers. Maybe you could make a case for all those guys. In my opinion, those are my next guys. Right. After that, I think it kind of drops off. I mean, you look at like a guy like DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin. They were in it. Like, when they were, years ago. It's not that they've gotten worse. They're just not necessarily right now a top whatever dynasty asset.
Perfect. Nailed it. Yep. What did you find about this group of wide receivers? What traits or qualities did they share as prospects?
Well, remarkably now, we are like this data set was so close to this perfect size. So many of these guys, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Neighbors, Amon-Ra, excuse me. Let me see who else fits it perfect. Most of those guys, first of all, the very, very top, but JSN, Rashee Rice, all those guys, so close to 6'1" and 200 pounds. Like, if you and I are old enough to remember the, Andre Johnson, Calvin Johnson, Michael Irvin, the prototype top tier guy, Randy Moss, was 6'4", 215, 220 even. Right? It was a bigger, heavier guy. Now they want to be a little bit smaller and a little bit quicker, but still have enough sort of alpha presence where they can break tackles and make big plays, right? So, maybe Brian Thomas Jr., 6'3", 210, even the sort of biggest you really want these guys. You don't want them 6'4", 6'5", 220, 225.
And so that's really, really interesting when I think about the 2025 class, because looking at the top of the wide receiver rankings, you do have a lot of guys like Luther Burden, like Matthew Golden, like Travis Hunter. I think even Igbuka, like those guys all pretty much fit. But for a lot of people, the number one wide receiver in the class, in fact, I think the consensus is Tet McMillan.
Yep.
And he is, like I've talked about this before, when you're looking at the first round busts, they mostly look like him.
Yeah, they sure do. Yeah, they sure do. He's yes, he does have bust characteristics. There's no doubt. He does fit the model, so to speak. He does fit the anatomy, but he also, if you made the anatomy of a bust, he'd probably fit that too.
I don't like that at all. I might just draft 12 running backs in the first round of rookie drafts this year. Now, I think you may have a little different take on that. And you know what? We may talk about that on Scott's show a little bit later this week. But when you look, are there also the same early declare signals at wide receiver that there are the running back position?
Yes, for the most part. Like who are the non-early declares? Puka. Well, he was an outlier, 5th round pick. Nico, 3rd round pick. Lad McConkey and Rashee Rice. Everybody else was an early declare. Almost all of them were 1st round picks. I mean, there's a few outliers for sure, but a lot of early capital. Even, that early second, where T. Higgins went, Lad McConkey, AJ Brown. Like as long as it's right there, that's generally where you're going to find. Look, we're doing some research right now. I think Joe's going to do it. Joe Kukatakis. We're talking about next week on our Dynasty Underground show, the sort of the line of demarcation. You and I are going to talk about that on my show, is where do you stop drafting wide receivers in a rookie draft? Like sometimes you look at the top 50 of the NFL draft, that top 50 draft capital, top 40 right in that ballpark is really a line of demarcation of success and failure in the NFL. Yes, there are outliers, but when you look at those outliers, like even a guy like Puka showed some of the things that I talk about on the anatomy and that really show up in our model at the wide receiver position. I would also say that the wide receiver position is a little easier to quote unquote scout than like the quarterback position, which is brutal. Running backs are very easy, of course. It's like, oh, they got good draft capital. They've got good opportunity. They're big, strong, and fast and catch the football. Sign me up, right? Wide receivers become a little bit different, a little bit more difficult, but a lot more fun, I think.
Yeah. Now, so we know the size, we know the early declare works out pretty well. Is there anything specific to production, anything that's maybe more indicative than something else in terms of touchdowns, volume, efficiency, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think target earning ability is the number one thing that tends to, like, if you could just tell me one thing, it's like, can they earn targets? You know, you look at a guy like Puka who had like a really shady, profile, not a lot of production because he was hurt and didn't play, and system and this, that, and the other. But if you just look at his like yards per route run, first downs per route run, targets per route run, dude was getting all that. He was very efficient and was earning targets at a very, very high level. So, those are the things that I think I look for, and yeah, that to me is one of the most important things that you can do.
Okay, I'm going to try not to get super frustrated now. We're going to move the tight end position. People are telling me once again that this is a good and deep tight end class. I am going to hear again in August that tight end is finally going to be good in Dynasty. And listen, Brock Bowers was awesome last year. Brock Bowers is the clear tight end one. I know Sam Laporta and Trey McBride are going to be in this data set as top whatever tight ends. I think you chose 6 of them. Yes. I'm not even sure who the other 3 are going to be. Go ahead.
Me neither. I don't know what to do. I mean, there's the omissions of Kyle Pitts and Kincaid, but in this I have George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, and Mark Andrews. A little bit of lifetime achievement award there, but also, dude, I think those are the 3 guys I would want if I have a tight end in Dynasty, because any of the other guys, the young guys, aren't proven producers. It's not like, oh, I'm giving up, 7 years of production if I just have Tucker Kraft instead of George Kittle. It's like, are you? Maybe. I don't really even know. Kincaid, Pitts, these guys, who knows if they're actually going to help your fantasy team win matchups. Whereas George Kittle, he's going to help you win a matchup. Mark Andrews, still helping you win a matchup, even though he did not help his actual NFL team win a matchup.
Now, as I'm looking at this list, I'm thinking like there's some pretty strong draft capital indicator here, right?
Yeah. Kittle was 5th round. Mark Andrews was 3rd round. But generally speaking, and historically, if I look, just at the, historical data, there is a little bit of draft capital. But what's crazy is if we look back at every tight end class, it's not, other than Bowers, but generally speaking, it's not the first tight end taken in a class, especially in fantasy. That is the number one. We miss it all the time, so that's very interesting for sure.
Well, yeah, I think about Trey McBride was a 2nd round pick, right?
He was 2nd round, yeah.
And
Laporta early 2nd. Yeah.
Right. So really, you're probably not. Kittle maybe kind of the exception, but that was a long time ago. There's not a lot of diamonds in the rough at this position. What about production? Because again, I feel like this is something that's changed recently. We didn't used to have a lot of tight ends who did much in terms of production at the college level. Now we seemingly have at least one guy, maybe 2, that just have incredible numbers.
Yeah, and when I first started doing this, because there wasn't always that college production, and because I was also trying to solve for George Kittle, right? Because you look at George Kittle, you're like, wait, he didn't do anything. Like, he had nothing. But if you look at like some of his underlying stats, like one of the ones that I look at, and because look, at the tight end position, you need duality. So you need to be big enough and fast enough. So really it's a size speed thing. If you don't have size and speed, just cross them off. Like, this goes historically too. Like, basically you need to be an athlete to be a difference maker at the tight end position. It doesn't mean you need to be an athlete to be good, Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz, whatever, right? These guys. But if you want to be a difference maker, a top end, top 6, top 5, fantasy tight end, you need to have some juice. And so we look at like even just yards per reception. All of these guys, their best season is over like 14.5, except Laporta was 12.6. So like 15, 14, 15, 16 yards per catch as their best season. Like that's really, really good. They all ran less than a 4.7 at the combine, which is a speed score basically of a 105 or better. So you want to see size adjusted speed with big playability. And then, even if we look at like another one that's pretty interesting, where is it? Yards per route run for like, I'm finding it here. Here it is. Yards per route run for even Kittle. His best was actually 3.12 for his career 1.91. So, even a guy like Kittle who had very, very low production, if you look at the raw number, his per route run numbers were actually pretty good, which makes sense because he's awesome.
So, and if I remember right, like Dalton Kincaid didn't do some of the testing and wasn't a particularly great athlete, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
And so now I don't have any idea why Kyle Pitts isn't good. I'm never going to know why Kyle Pitts isn't good. But speaking of why Kyle Pitts isn't good, somebody in the chat does ask, where does Jonnu Smith compare to these tight ends in redraft or over Dynasty? I think in the Dynasty discussion, Jonnu Smith is really difficult because he's 30. He just had this breakout campaign. I think a lot of these things that you were talking about, he would have measured pretty well by. Like he is a very good athlete. But
so what's interesting about Jonnu Smith is he's probably not on this list, but understanding this information is what helps you be more interested in a guy like Jonnu Smith and David Njoku before last year when he sort of blew up than other sort of run-of-the-mill tight ends because they offer upside. There are players like that right now. Maybe it's Jatavian Sanders or Theo Johnson. I'm not saying they will be. Even Chig Okonkwo is a little Jonnu Smithy. I don't think Chig is probably going to be good, but if he ends up being good, he has the chance to be really good, if that makes sense, right? Same with like a Jonnu Smith type player. Jonnu, everybody felt like, he's nobody. And then all of a sudden he's somebody because he's really athletic, Right. And so, yeah, you want to look for even Raz score we look at. And Raz is basically, relative athletic score,
right.
Ken Plant. And, above an 8 is like point of entry. So you need to be good as an athlete and then hopefully show some signs of being able to, earn targets and make big plays at the college level. And that's really all you need.
And because I'll throw him back out there again.
Yeah.
Pretty sure Noah Fant was like 9.89. And that's why I can't ever quit the guy. Maybe one day he'll get to go to play Miami and get over 100 targets for some reason, and we'll get to have a fun season with him. One more question from the chat before we wrap this up. I feel like Ben Sinnott is a sleeping giant with Jaden Daniels as his quarterback, and I think a lot of people feel that way, and it's easier too because Trey McBride was also in front behind Zach Ertz, and so now maybe if Zach Ertz get out of the way, Ben Sinnott can be good as well. Scott, fantastic job today. I really appreciate you being here. Always enjoy each year getting to talk about the Anatomy of series. Once again, just tell everybody where they can find your work and what you got coming up next.
Well, I've got you coming up next this week on the show. So if you all love Mr. Heath Cummings, it'll be a great opportunity for you to see him in his long form. I give him a chance to really talk it out. Everything, we just chat and we go for as long as Heath will be gracious enough to allow me to. That's on The Undrafted. Check out the Dynasty Underground. I think it's a fun show. We're having a lot of fun doing it. So it's a little bit more nonsense, but still we're right to the point. We're covering ground. We had a pretty cool, mock draft episode recently. Those are always fun. So if you want to pop that on and see how we are on that show, check it out. And of course, everything else at The Undroppables and undroppables.com.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you to Mikey for running the show today. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat, giving us things to talk about. Again, there will not be a show this Friday, but we will talk to you next Tuesday.